On the afternoon of October 27, 1896, 3 men stood at the eastern edge of the Selway-Bitterroot Wilderness in what is now Idaho Territory, studying 2 paths into the mountains. One wound north along a ridgeline marked on their survey map. The other dropped into a forested basin that appeared, from where they stood, to offer more direct passage west. They chose the basin. Within 72 hours, all 3 would be missing. Within 6 weeks, 2 would be dead. The third was never found. Their names were recorded in the expedition log kept by the Regional Land Office in Missoula. Benjamin Carver, Chief Surveyor, age 41. His assistant, James Holcomb, 28, married 8 months prior. And their packer, a man identified only as Lundgren, first name unrecorded, estimated age 55. Lundgren had worked the mountain camps for 17 seasons. He knew the Bitterroots. He argued against the basin route. The expedition was commissioned by the General Land Office to establish property boundaries ahead of anticipated railroad expansion. It was late-season work. Snow had already closed the higher passes. Carver had been delayed twice that summer by equipment failures and was behind schedule. His contract stipulated completion by November 15th, or payment would be withheld. This detail survives in a letter Carver sent to his brother in St. Louis, dated October 12th. The letter is held in the Montana Historical Society archives. In it, Carver writes, "The weather will not wait, and neither will the office. We go in at month's end, come what may." The men departed the logging camp at Salmon Creek on the morning of October 27th. The camp foreman, a man named Ritchie, later testified that the sky was clear, but the temperature had dropped sharply overnight. He said Carver seemed impatient. Holcomb checked the packs twice. Lundgren was quiet. Ritchie's testimony, given to a federal marshal in December of that year, contains a single line that would later be cited repeatedly. Lundgren said the basin was a trap this time of year. Carver said they didn't have time for the long way. They carried provisions for 12 days, 2 mules, standard surveying equipment, transit, chains, stakes, field books, 1 Winchester rifle, 3 wool blankets each. No tent, as the survey was expected to take them through timbered country where shelter could be improvised. Ritchie watched them descend into the tree line. He noted in his own journal, recovered years later, that Carver walked ahead without looking back. The ridge route would have taken them 4 days longer. It was exposed, colder, but it followed known terrain. The basin route appeared shorter on the map. The map was incomplete. That was the decision. Survey work in the Montana and Idaho territories during the 1890s was seasonal, transactional, and often rushed. The federal government was under pressure to accelerate land sales to fund Western infrastructure. Surveyors worked under fixed contracts with narrow deadlines. Extensions were rarely granted. Payment structures incentivized speed over caution. Benjamin Carver had been surveying since 1883. His employment record, preserved in General Land Office files, shows steady work across Wyoming, Montana, and northern Idaho. He was neither reckless nor celebrated. His supervisors described him as competent and efficient. One evaluation from 1894 noted, "Completes work on schedule, minimally communicative but reliable." Carver's personal correspondence suggests a man concerned with money and standing. In a letter to his wife, dated August 1896, he mentions hoping to secure a deputy surveyor appointment, which required a proven record of completed contracts. He wrote, "One more season without incident, and the position is mine." James Holcomb was newer to the work. He had been hired as Carver's assistant in June of that year. Before that, he worked as a clerk in a Spokane mercantile. His diary, found in his coat pocket when his body was recovered, reveals a man uncomfortable with the wilderness, but eager to prove himself. An entry from September reads, "I do not understand these mountains. They are not like the hills at home. Mr. Carver says I will learn." Lundgren left almost no written record. What little is known comes from second-hand accounts. He was Norwegian, possibly Swedish. He worked as a packer and guide for various survey and mining parties throughout the 1880s and 1890s. He was described as solitary, capable and familiar with winter travel. He did not drink. He did not gamble. He was hired repeatedly because he did not lose animals or supplies. The Bitterroot Range in late October is a landscape in transition. Daytime temperatures hover near 40 degrees. Nights drop below freezing. Early snow accumulates in sheltered basins and north-facing slopes, while exposed ridges remain bare. Cloud cover can settle in the valleys and remain for days. Visibility becomes unreliable. Carver would have known this. The question is whether he believed it applied to him. The basin they entered was not named on their map. Local trappers referred to it as Deadfall Basin, though the name does not appear in official records until 1902. The basin is a glacially carved depression, roughly 2 miles wide, surrounded by steep timbered slopes. A seasonal creek runs through its center, draining west into the Selway River drainage. In summer, it is passable. In late fall, it becomes a cold sink where temperatures can drop 20 degrees lower than the surrounding ridges. Ritchie, the camp foreman, later said Lundgren had described the basin as bad ground after first snow. Carver reportedly dismissed this. According to Ritchie, Carver said, "We are not children, we are professionals." The men entered the basin on the afternoon of October 27th. They were expected to return to Salmon Creek by November 7th. No communication was planned in the interim. This was standard. On October 29th, 2 days after their departure, a weather system moved south from British Columbia. It brought heavy cloud cover and a temperature drop. By October 31st, it was snowing steadily across the Bitterroots. This meteorological data comes from U.S. Army Signal Corps records, which maintained a weather station at Fort Missoula. On November 1st, the station recorded 12 inches of new snow at lower elevations. Higher elevations were estimated to have received significantly more. The men would have been deep in the basin by then. The sequence of events after October 27th must be reconstructed from physical evidence, partial records, and the testimony of those who found what remained. The last known sighting of the 3 men was at the eastern rim of the basin, approximately 3 miles west of Salmon Creek Camp, at midday on October 27th. A trapper named Angus Boyle, traveling east toward the logging camp, saw them from a distance. He did not speak with them. In his later statement, he said they were moving in single file, descending into heavy timber. He noted that the mules were loaded high and that the men carried no visible tent poles. Boyle also said the sky to the west was darkening. What happened over the next 3 days can only be inferred. Based on the location where Holcomb's body was eventually found, the men traveled approximately 6 miles into the basin before stopping. This suggests steady progress on the 27th and 28th, followed by a halt on the 29th, likely due to the arrival of the storm system. Holcomb's diary contains entries up to the evening of October 28th. The final entry reads, "Cold tonight. Mr. Carver says we will make the western slope by Thursday and be out of the weather. Lundgren has not spoken since morning. Thursday would have been October 29th. They did not reach the western slope. On the morning of October 29th, the weather turned. The temperature dropped. Cloud cover settled into the basin. Visibility would have been reduced to a few hundred feet. Snow began falling by midday. At some point on the 29th or 30th, the men made camp. Evidence of this camp was found the following spring by a search party. The site was located in a stand of lodgepole pine, roughly a quarter-mile north of the creek. There were signs of a fire. Long, cold. Scattered equipment. 1 mule carcass, partially scavenged. No tent had been erected. The men had sheltered under the trees. The temperature on the night of October 30th, based on Fort Missoula records and adjusted for elevation, would have been near 0 degrees Fahrenheit. At some point, a decision was made to leave the camp. This is where the sequence becomes critical. Holcomb's body was found in April 1897 by a mining survey crew working the southern edge of the basin. He was lying face down in a shallow ravine approximately 2 miles south of the camp, alone. His coat was unbuttoned. His gloves were missing. These are symptoms of paradoxical undressing, a behavior exhibited in severe hypothermia when the victim experiences a false sensation of warmth. His diary was still in his pocket. There were no additional entries after October 28th. The physical evidence suggests he became separated from the others and died while attempting to return east. The direction he was traveling when he fell indicates he was trying to climb out of the basin. He did not succeed. Carver's body was found 3 weeks after Holcomb's in June by a sheepherder moving stock through the high country. Carver was located nearly 4 miles northwest of the camp, near the upper tree line. He was partially buried in snowmelt. His pack was gone. The rifle was with him, unfired. The position of his body suggests he was attempting to reach the western ridge, the route they had originally hoped to follow out of the basin. He had climbed nearly 2,000 vertical feet from the camp before he stopped. He was found sitting against a tree. Lundgren was never found. The question that emerges from these locations is simple. Why did they leave the camp? The answer, reconstructed from the evidence, is that they ran out of time. Carver's contract required completion by November 15th. If the men remained in the camp and waited out the storm, they would lose days. If they lost days, Carver would lose his payment and possibly his future appointment. The storm showed no sign of clearing. Staying meant failure. Leaving meant risk. But it also meant a chance. It is likely that Carver believed the weather would improve. It is likely he believed they could push through the basin, reach the western slope, and descend into milder conditions. He had been in the mountains before. He had survived October storms. He had always come out. What Carver did not account for was the depth of the cold sink in the basin, the temperature differential between the basin floor and the surrounding ridges, the effect of wet snow on wool clothing, the speed with which hypothermia progresses when motion stops. At some point on October 30th or 31st, Carver made the decision to break camp and attempt the crossing. Lundgren, according to the evidence, refused. This conclusion is drawn from the absence of Lundgren's body near the others, and from a notation in Holcomb's diary dated October 28th. Lundgren says we should stay low and wait. Mr. Carver will not wait. If Lundgren stayed at the camp, he would have had the remaining supplies, 1 mule and the only experienced judgment. He would have had a chance. But he is not in the records after that point. Carver and Holcomb left. They climbed. They separated either intentionally or by accident. Holcomb turned back. Carver pushed forward. Neither made it out. The men were reported overdue on November 10, 1896. Ritchie, the camp foreman at Salmon Creek, notified the land office in Missoula when the survey party failed to return by November 8th, the outer edge of their expected window. The initial response was administrative. A telegram was sent to the regional office requesting clarification on the party's route and last known position. No immediate search was authorized. Winter had arrived. The passes were closed. Official policy discouraged rescue operations in the high country after November 1st. Carver's wife, who lived in Helena, sent multiple letters to the land office between mid-November and late December. These letters, preserved in federal archives, express increasing alarm and frustration. In one, dated December 3rd, she wrote, "You sent him into those mountains with no support and no margin. Now you say the weather prevents looking for him. Whose fault is the weather?" A formal search was not organized until the spring thaw. On April 6, 1897, a party of 6 men, including Ritchie and a deputy U.S. Marshal, entered the basin from the east. They carried descriptions of the missing men and a rough map based on Carver's planned survey route. The search lasted 8 days. Holcomb's body was found on April 9th. The discovery location was nearly 2 miles off the expected route. The deputy marshal's report noted, "Deceased appeared to have been moving southeast at time of death, contrary to the direction of intended travel. Evidence suggests disorientation." Carver's body was found on June 14th by a civilian, unrelated to the official search. The sheep herder who found him reported it to authorities in Salmon, Idaho, 3 days later. By the time a recovery party reached the site, animals had disturbed the remains. No sign of Lundgren was ever found. Searches in 1897, 1898, and again in 1903 turned up nothing. His name appears in missing persons records through 1905, then disappears. Whether he left the basin alive, died elsewhere, or lies undiscovered is unknown. The investigation into the disappearance concluded in September 1897. The federal marshal assigned to the case, a man named Drummond, filed a final report that is notable for its brevity. He wrote, "The deceased entered difficult country late in the season and were overtaken by weather. No evidence of foul play. Cause of death, exposure." Carver's widow was denied a settlement by the General Land Office on the grounds that the contract had not been completed. She petitioned twice. Both petitions were rejected. In 1899, she moved east and remarried. Her later life is unrecorded. Holcomb's widow, Agnes, returned to her family in Oregon. She never remarried. In a letter written to Ritchie in 1902, she asked if he believed her husband had suffered. Ritchie's response, if he sent one, does not survive. The Deadfall Basin survey was completed in 1898 by a different crew. They entered in July and followed the ridge route. It took them 9 days. They encountered no difficulties. In the years following the incident, the basin acquired a reputation. Local guides avoided it in late fall. Trappers working the area reported finding pieces of equipment scattered and overgrown, though none were definitively linked to the 1896 expedition. A map error was discovered in 1901. The original survey map used by Carver showed the basin draining west through a low saddle, which suggested an easy exit. In reality, the western edge of the basin rises steeply and is blocked by a series of cliffs. The map was corrected in subsequent editions. Whether Carver consulted the map before choosing the basin route is unknown. Whether he would have chosen differently if the map had been accurate is a matter of speculation. What is certain is that the decision to enter the basin was made quickly, under pressure, and based on incomplete information. It was a professional decision, a calculated risk, the kind of choice made 1,000 times by 1,000 men in those years, most of whom walked out and went on with their lives. Carver did not. I first encountered the story of the Deadfall Basin Survey Party in 2003 while researching Land Office records for a project on early federal surveying practices. The file was thin, a few letters, a marshal's report, a death certificate for Holcomb, issued retroactively in 1898. What struck me was not the tragedy itself, but the silence around it. There was no public inquiry, no newspaper coverage beyond a brief notice in the Missoulian, no monument or historical marker. The men vanished, were found, and were filed away. I spent the next several years tracking down related documents: Carver's correspondence, Holcomb's diary, Ritchie's testimony, weather records, maps. I visited the basin in 2005 in late summer, when the ground was dry and the air clear. It is a beautiful place, quiet, the kind of place that feels indifferent to human presence. Standing at the eastern rim, where the men would have stood in October 1896, I could see why the basin looked appealing. It was green, sheltered. The route down appeared straightforward. The ridge to the north was barren and exposed. I also understood why Lundgren objected. The basin is a bowl. Once you descend into it, the only way out is up. If the weather closes in, you are trapped. Carver knew this, or should have. He had been surveying for over a decade. He understood mountain weather. He understood deadlines. He understood the cost of failure. But he also believed he could make it. Men like Carver always believe they can make it. They have made it before. They will make it again. That is how they survive in professions that demand constant exposure to risk. Until they don't. What haunts me about this story is not the disappearance itself, but the proximity of the decision. Carver stood at the rim of the basin and chose. He could have turned north. He could have sent word back to Missoula requesting an extension. He could have listened to Lundgren. He did none of those things. Instead, he did what countless men in his position have done. He looked at the weather, looked at the calendar, and decided the risk was acceptable. It was not a reckless decision. It was not an ignorant decision. It was a human decision, made under pressure, with incomplete information and competing priorities. And it killed him. I think about this often. How many of our disasters are not failures of knowledge, but failures of judgment? How many are not the result of ignorance, but of overconfidence? How many times do we choose the easy route because the hard route seems unreasonable? Or because we are tired? Or because we have done it before and it was fine? Carver's body was buried in Helena. Holcomb's was returned to Oregon. Lundgren, wherever he is, remains in the Bitterroots. The Land Office updated its contracting policies in 1899, allowing for weather-related delays without penalty. The change came too late for Carver, but it likely saved others. The basin is still there. The Forest Service maps now label it correctly. A few cairns mark old survey points established by the 1898 crew that completed Carver's work. There are no markers for the men who died trying. In the end, the story is simple. 3 men entered the mountains. 2 were found. 1 was not. They chose the easy route because the hard route seemed too costly. It was a reasonable choice. It was the last choice they made.